Total Drama struck a chord with a lot of people, which, in retrospect, is pretty remarkable. The first season was a straightforward parody of reality show competitions, which literally reduced its characters to single-word archetypes and delivered laughs through lowbrow and particularly violent physical comedy. Nonetheless, this first installment paved the way for an empire which spanned several years, spin-offs, and of course, fame-hungry teenage contestants ripe for the torturing. Make no mistake, we've got a good to evil list and place for each and every one of them. For now though, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, here to take a stab at the OG Total Drama cast, the original 22 campers of Wawanakwa, the newcomers who joined the ranks in Season 3, and of course, Chris and Chef. Alright, let's get started.
Not try any of what you see here at home.
Our gold standard of good is Gentle Giant DJ, or Devin Joseph Poopy-Doo, as his mother calls him.
It's me, Mama. It's Poopy-Doo.
DJ is a textbook example of purity. His arc in each season is a testament to his good nature. He spends his time on the island mothering a baby bunny he finds in the woods, and, upon finding himself to be a jinx whose continued presence leads to animals getting hurt, actively tries to remove himself from the competition. If there were any actions on his record, it might have been his actions in Total Drama Action, in which he joins an alliance with Chef, which lends him an unfair advantage in the game. We get a surprisingly in-depth look at DJ's psyche in a dream he has, in which his mother, representing his conscience, admonishes him for doing so. This ultimately leads him to abandon the prize money and leave the competition on his own volition. Official sources call DJ a teddy bear, and that definition fits him like a glove.
That is one brave man.
He's also a progressive portrayal of masculinity, certainly capable of standing up to things that threaten his friends, but also not afraid to be emotional and rely on others for help. DJ is a saint. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. For our silver standard, we present Bridget. As the resident surfer chick and the last girl standing on the killer bass, Bridget had her work cut out for her midway through the first season. In a battle of the sexes type challenge, she tries to unify the other girls, but to no avail. But this episode really highlights her as a good person, particularly when her morals lead her to protest being served dolphin meat. She's courageous, she's compassionate, and she tries to do right as both competitor and colleague to Total Drama. Notably, she's consistently the nicer of the two Aftermath hosts.
Be nice to get a real man out here.
She also served as an on-hand medic for her team more than once. Bridget goes through a rough patch in her relationship with Jeff, which sours her a little during the third season, though admittedly, this was partially due to outside influences, namely Blainley and Alejandro. If she had any faults of character, it was probably being too invested in her relationship with Jeff, which ended up costing her the competition. For bronze, we have Cody. Cody is likely the most beloved character from the original cast, if not the entire series. It's a little-known fact that two characters were based on a real-life fan of his, and her life-size homemade doll of him, and it's honestly not hard to see why he's likable. Cody's not suave, and a lot of the passes he makes wouldn't fly today, but he's a sweet kid, and that comes out a lot over the course of his time on the show. Arguably, he does more for Gwen and Trent's romance than either of them do, even after Gwen tonelessly rejected his affection specifically for Trent's, and continues to support her throughout the first season. He's also one of the few characters to have no significant conflicts during this time, barring one angry bear that nearly mauls him to death. Season 3 saw Cody return with a crazed fan join at his hip, something that he had a hard time tolerating for obvious reasons. But that doesn't stop him from at least trying to be accommodating, though it isn't a stretch to say that it did limit his character development. Regardless, we can remember Cody for being the sweet, if somewhat awkward, guy next door versus the world. Next, we have Beth. Though initially written off as a wannabe, she's known for her awkwardness in the face of more charismatic competitors. At first, Beth seemed like she was doomed to be Heather's lackey, but it takes her a short time to tire of Heather's treatment and stand up for herself.
I'm tired of being your slave.
Beth spends the rest of her time with Total Drama being among the friendliest contestants. She immediately strikes up a friendship with Lindsay and even goes on to become a finalist, not because she plays the game a certain way, mainly just because she's so nice. No one ever votes her off until the merge. Even then, she only becomes underhanded in defense of herself or others, as demonstrable by her brief alliance with Courtney. Beth appeared to be naive, but also principled, something that most of her fellows lose out on in their gradual pursuit of riches, romance, or revenge. She isn't well remembered after the fact, but you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who doesn't remember her fondly. Then there's Lindsay the princess. You know, every show seemed to have a Lindsay back in the early 2000s. This Lindsay wasn't a mean girl, but she definitely fell into that crowd, and Lindsay was among those unfortunate enough to become the villain's lapdog. In her case, her master was Heather, and Lindsay was coerced, even threatened, into doing some pretty mean things. Namely, she helped Heather eliminate her competition in cold blood, and even ruin the relationship for Gwen and Trent.
Can count on me.
But Lindsay wasn't entirely at fault here, since she was being manipulated. And once she does wisen up, after it costs her the first season, she actually becomes a force to be reckoned with in the next few seasons. One might count her relationship with Courtney against her, but really, everything that happened to her, Courtney had coming. If anything holds Lindsay back, it's her lack of foresight. Being unfortunately unintelligent, she can be an inconvenience more than an asset. She's also not the best at being a girlfriend, frequently forgetting who her boyfriend is. Still, she's one of the nicest competitors out there, showing that it's entirely possible to be pretty inside and out. Finally, party monster Owen. This lovable fat guy ended up winning the first season, mainly because he was so likable. In an increasingly hostile environment, he was the comic relief for the audience as well as his teammates.
Awesome to be here, man.
Despite his spastic colon, people tended to like Owen for his excitable and friendly demeanor, but he's not as good as we might remember. He places where he does for his friendliness, but this amicability isn't universal. For starters, Owen isn't as kind to himself as he is other people. He mentions at one point to Heather that he feels disappointed in no one taking him seriously, but he goes along with it nonetheless. Further, in the second season, Owen actually returns to the competition with specific instructions to cause drama between the other contestants. Admittedly, he dislikes his role, but again, goes along with it anyway. Perhaps his worst trait is his default emotional response to any stressful situation: eating, something that causes problems and challenges. These things aside, Owen is liked universally for his enthusiastic and forgiving ways. So, we place him here, comfortably among the best. Next is Sadie, one half of the best female friends for life, the exclusive club consisting of herself and Katie. Despite being joined at Katie's hip in most of the appearances, Sadie is able to outlast Katie and even grow from it. This allows her to place higher out of the two. Notably, she demonstrates a significant capacity for empathy. Just after losing Katie, she helps Lindsay survive their shared worst fear of bad haircuts.
I totally forgot how cute you are.
She also works to put aside missing her best friend and participate in the game. She's able to see past her dislike of Heather to be happy for her and Alejandro later on. Sadie isn't ever given the chance to be fleshed out. She and Katie tend to be accessories to stronger competitors or just whatever boy they happen to like this week. Nonetheless, Sadie is a good friend and a good person, visible in the few moments which she does get.
Marshmallow eating freaks!
Then there's Tyler, a hapless jock who's so dumb and uncoordinated, he manages to cheat death every other episode. But Tyler's another case of a good person in a demanding environment. In season 1, he was mostly preoccupied with getting noticed by Lindsay, whom he immediately formed a crush on. The next few seasons, though, manages to give him an arc, and him getting past his insecurities. Tyler is noticeably one of the few insecure competitors to go through this arc, and the only one to do so in a healthy way. He gradually goes from a jock stereotype to a sensitive individual, and further demonstrates himself capable of great loyalty. He actually saves himself and all of his teammates from certain death at one point.
Got wicked strong fingers. Docs can't explain it.
And rather than become annoyed with Lindsay forgetting him, he works to help her remember. All things considered, he might be the sweetest of the contestants we have, certainly the most dedicated to his romantic partner. He's no one-trick pony, like you might think by looking at him. And then there's Jeff, a total drama staple who appears in nearly every installment of the series. The first season sees Jeff as a team player as well as a mood lightener. People gravitated towards him for his carefree and kind-hearted nature, even sticklers like Gwen and Duncan. He became one of the most well-liked characters of the first season and even landed a job as an Aftermath host after his second elimination. But this role changed him considerably, leading to several stains on his permanent goodness record. In fact, he becomes similar to Chris in his pursuit of reality show glory and trods on his former friends and his girlfriend to get what he wants. For example, he risks several lives to get an appropriate amount of drama from sensitive situations, threatening Gwen with an anvil and Owen with an electric shock for not playing into the game he devises.
A huge hammer will swing down and knock you clear out of your chair.
Jeff eventually sees the light and returns to his old ways, even managing to return for one of the spin-offs. We can talk more about his subsequent performances there, but as far as a few installments go, he was a good guy who almost went down the wrong path. But he was brought back by, in true cartoon fashion, by the power of love. Our resident cool guy, Trent, comes next. Unfortunately, he misses out on 9th place, where we've no doubt he'd be happier. Trent was one of the most popular members of the original cast because, of course he was. He was a sensitive musician who would sit up and stargaze all night with you. He's the stuff all the indie teen flicks are made of. He was just honest about it. Indeed, much of his character was centered around his budding relationship with another fan favorite, Gwen. But he did demonstrate himself to be a good boyfriend and a good person.
Take a skunk shot for any day.
Certainly, he made a few enemies in his time and proved himself a strong enough competitor to lead a team. Or so it appears, because Trent's real flaw is that he was so blinded by love, he was willing to screw his team over. By his own admission, when it appeared he was losing ground with Gwen, he chose to cater to her in the face of her own objections. Precisely what you don't want to do if you don't want to be voted off. Trent feels like he was shunted out of the way in the writer's room once it looked like Gwen and Duncan was a more popular pairing. In fact, he rarely, if ever, was even mentioned in the eventual love triangle that developed between them and Courtney. He just sort of feels forgotten. So we'll leave him here, where he can officially round out our good guys. As far as good girls go, though, we have Lashana, an aspiring community organizer and total drama mainstay. It says a lot about Lashana that her popularity among the cast is what gets her eliminated in the first season, but she does qualify as our least good, and this is for several reasons. Unmistakably, Lashana has good intentions. She's a strong competitor and obviously cares about her teammates and fellow campers, but she's also the most underhanded among our good guys, and further, her temper is more likely to make the lives of those around her harder than not. For example, in Season 2, she proves herself to be willing and apt at manipulating others, which she does to secure a prize for herself. She also spends most of her time in a fierce rivalry with Heather, which admittedly is consistently a two-way street.
Don't be starting something, girl.
It isn't fair to deny Lashana a spot as a good character because she is a good character, but she is the first on our list to be in it to win it completely. She cares, but she plays the game as she needs to, and that requires just a little bit of selfishness. But we've talked about our good guys, so now let's tackle the gray area. These guys fall pretty comfortably in the neutrals, but not all neutrals are created equal. First, we have Katie. It might seem strange to see her so far from her BFFFL, but all the evidence points to her being the more dominant and less kind member of the duo. For starters, she's more vain than her friend, insisting that she's the pretty one and that everyone thinks so.
You're just saying that because I'm prettier than you.
She intentionally upsets Sadie with this information during a fight and even body shames her behind her back in the same episode. This also happens to be the challenge that she and Sadie cost their team, resulting in her elimination. Her subsequent appearances have her solidly at Sadie's side, but even then, she appears to be the meaner one. She suggests an anti-Gwen club and fights demonstrably harder for the affections of her crushes, namely Trent and Justin. Katie's a nice person, to an extent. She never manipulates or eliminates anyone, and never complains about the squalid conditions that Wawanakwa imposes. Regardless, to be as dependent as she and Sadie are on one another, she could afford to be a better friend. Still, inoffensive as she ultimately is, we place her here. Next, Izzy, the hose beast. For real, that's what people call her. I have no idea what hose beast means. She lives up to her reputation as a lunatic, and her status as a wanted fugitive of the Canadian government.
I am so totally AWOL.
In fact, Izzy and her many alter egos might be the closest any of these guys come to a truly chaotic neutral. In every season she appears in, Izzy's creativity is unbound. She operates on her own wavelength, and honestly, that works for her as a strategy. But her eccentricities do wear on others, particularly when she's being an inconvenience. Izzy's darkest actions include rigging explosives and risking the lives of her teammates for her own delusions. She also dressed up as a bear and terrorized her own team, just because. Alternatively, she's saved her friends on multiple occasions and even gone toe-to-toe with Chef Hatchet, which honestly is pretty awesome.
You'll never get me alive!
She sells out her friends and intents an algorithm for time travel, then returns to her old ways just in time to blow everyone, including herself, to smithereens. It goes without saying that Izzy is unorthodox, and that could be a good thing or, oh my god, a bad thing. But she was a fun character for the time that she lasted. Ezekiel the homeschooled comes next. This poor guy never really had a chance, did he? And arguably, he's inconsequential for the first 2 seasons, playing the smallest role out of all the competitors. He does piss off his fellows with his lack of social graces and backwards thinking, both consequences of his sheltered upbringing, resulting in his nigh immediate removal from the island.
Dock of shame is that way, bro.
He wouldn't return to prominence until World Tour, in which he is, again, the first to get the boot. But in a show of tenacity, he manages to physically stay on the jet at the expense of his sanity. He becomes a Gremlins parody pretty quickly, and even manages some dark feats, namely attacking other people. Zeke isn't really a bad guy. It might be unfair to blame him for going feral on us, considering it didn't really look like he could help it. But he is backwards and awkward and sexist, so maybe he's better off as a zombie.
Found him living in the cargo hold, homeschooling with the rats.
I mean, he looks happier anyway. Next is Harold. Harold is a Napoleon Dynamite ripoff who eventually became a jack of many trades and one of the most valuable wild cards in the game. But Harold's time on the island was more defined by his fraught relationship with the other guys on his team. In order to get back at Duncan, Harold orchestrates Courtney's elimination, becoming one of the few campers to successfully cheat the game.
You guys think you're so funny.
Remarkable as this is, though, it does him no favors regarding his placement on a moral gradient. With time, though, he demonstrates himself to be interested in Lashana and willing to fight for her affections. In this pursuit, he at least demonstrates his capacity to be forgiving, being willing to look past her deceiving him. Though he also effectively uses Lashana for chemical warfare later in that episode, which is pretty monstrous, he also resorts to some pretty low shots in his ensuing feud with Duncan. Ultimately, Harold appears to only be as bad as his situation. While he doesn't appear to be naturally malicious, he does show a penchant for it. For this reason, we place him here. And what total drama listicle would be complete without Sierra, the Uber fan? She enters under the pretext of her impossibly intense crush on Cody, but manages to stick around long enough to make a sizable impact on the series. But this impact isn't always positive, particularly in her earlier appearances.
You can check your email when I'm done writing my blog if you want.
Sierra's fatal flaw was, and remains, her obsessive nature. She physically needs an outlet for her enthusiasm, and being denied this can be disastrous for her mental state, as well as the well-being of those around her. This aside, she becomes a good ally to Cody, to an extent, and even develops her character enough to exist without him, also to an extent. That is, she trades in her obsession with Cody for an obsession over total drama, and that's super sad. I mean, can you imagine knowing so much about this stupid show? I couldn't. Sierra is an odd bird, sure, and she causes a lot of grief in her attempts to get what she wants. Still, she's not a bad person for this. She's a fan who's living her dream, interacting with her favorite media, and she doesn't really do anything to jeopardize anyone else's shot at the money.
Move it, lovebirds.
But I'm carrying precious cargo.
Like, she's not perfect, but she's a good girl. Let her be a lesson, though. Too much internet is a bad thing. Go outside, get some sun. Next is Gwen, our resident goth. A loner by profession, Gwen comes off as surly and unapproachable, something even Trent admits, and the island does nothing to help. She gets by relying on no one and competing to the best of her abilities. But time changes Gwen more than any other contestant, and it's no understatement to say that she eventually runs afoul of many. Her time on the second season ends honorably enough. She lets herself be tortured to make up for Trent throwing challenges for her, and even votes herself off to be thrown to an unsympathetic public.
Whoever's in charge of karma, I hope that counts for something.
but she does manage to set the record straight just in time to crash land Duncan's relationship with Courtney. It isn't fair to blame Gwen for that spark dying, but it doesn't do her any favors either, nor is she innocent in the mini feud she finds herself in, namely her beefs with Heather and Courtney. Gwen is not a fatalist. She believes in karma predetermining her destiny and works to appease the universe so that good things will happen for her. This tends to bleed into her daily life and how she handles the competition. She's gray because she's petty enough to stoop to others' level, but usually for the right, or at least sympathetic reasons. She was a good friend and a decent person. Still, Gwen was done dirty by her extended time on Total Drama, and so here shall she be condemned and spitting distance of her criminal ex. That's right, talking about Duncan, who's next. Duncan was one of the most cherished contestants of the first season. His devil-may-care attitude and defying chef made him the darling of the audience, and he was helped along by his budding relationship with Courtney. But Duncan was also a really good guy.
Why are you so uptight all the time?
He jumped through several hoops to find a replacement for DJ's fallen bunny at one point, and even showed some signs of softening towards the end of the game. But time wore on for Duncan as well, and his personality admittedly shifted for the sake of the plot, namely the love triangle that formed around him and the grief it caused for everyone involved. There were plenty of times that he screwed the pooch on that one, and despite the many instances where he couldn't really be blamed, most of his problems were contingent on his selfishness and his indecision. Still, Duncan remained a character who would do the wrong thing for the right reasons, and eventually came to focus his more destructive tendencies against Chris, something that not long cost him the game, but his freedom as well. But this also came solely in response to him feeling like he was falling short of his bad boy image.
You want me to sing? Forget it!
In the end, Duncan really showed his backside in regards to his values, an unfortunate byproduct of reality television. So here he rests at the very bottom of our gray pile. We've seen the situational heroes and the situational bad guys, but what about the career villains in our midst? We find them here in the infernal regions of our bad to evil category. To start us off, we have Heather. Heather goes from being an incredibly skilled, if hateable, mean girl to one of Total Drama's all-time strongest competitors. Her redemption arc consisted of losing her hair and a few brain cells before coming back swinging in the third season. Here's where we really start to see this character shine. She's no longer uncontested in her manipulation of others. People are wise to it, and then there's Alejandro, who appears better at it. But Heather's redemption is interesting in that it never really softens her competitive edge. She continues to scheme and play to her strengths, but she's also put in more dangerous situations, necessitating more creative measures than simply playing coy to get what she wants.
Sorry, but I'm fast and flexible.
This is something that eventually all the castmates have to reckon with, the processing absurdity of the game. Heather might be the contestant who most rises to meet this challenge. It also humanizes her as a fierce fighter and as a person. She does what she does to get ahead, so with time her aggression feels less personal, less malicious. But she's still selfish and egotistical, and that's why we love her, but we find her here. Next is Noah. To be fair, Noah does develop as a character, though this doesn't really happen in the generation covered in this video. We definitely will talk about Redonkulous Race Noah, but for now, we can only judge him on his performance in the first 3 seasons. His time in the island was perhaps his lowest point, proving him to be cold, sarcastic, and unhelpful. World Tour sees him return as much less aloof, but also no less sardonic. His first major role in this season comes from him being discerning. He's one of the first competitors to suspect Alejandro. Ultimately, though, this isn't really enough to spare him the arch-villain's wrath.
Just beware of eels.
Again, it simply takes Noah a while to come out of his shell, and though we do see vestiges of who he eventually becomes, we see his more callow side first. So that side, the one who sat out of the dodgeball game and tells off his friend, is the side that places in the lower strata of the evil list. Then there's Alejandro, the literal handsome devil who matches wits with Heather in season 3. He's another manipulative type, but a uniquely talented one at that. He manages to hoodwink just about everyone, including otherwise very discerning characters like Lashana. In fact, he amalgamates the 2 types of manipulation we've seen before. Like Heather, he convinces others that his intentions are pure, and like Justin, he lets his abs do the talking when words fail. At the end of the day, Al might be our smartest villain, if only because he knows better than to underestimate his opponents. His only crux is Heather, who actually manages to steal her way into his evil heart.
Our connection goes deeper than any game.
But Al isn't as bad as he might be. He has a sense of chivalry to him and maintains his dignity in rough situations. He also isn't wasteful and never expends any more than he needs to. Still, he's labeled the arch-villain for a reason, and that reason is that he's simply good at being bad. Next is Justin. We can't really say much about Justin that we can't say Alejandro did better. He's equally known for his beauty, but Justin appears to be more enamored with himself than anyone else ever is. In fact, Justin's fatal flaw is also his greatest strength. He's so beautiful that he's hollow, and that works for him for a while when he has other people charmed, but it quickly wears off.
Time to catch the boat of losers, brah.
For a minute, he looks poised to be the big bad of the second season, but he falls through the cracks pretty quickly after he wears out his welcome. Justin also sort of just stops existing once Alejandro comes on the scene. He joins the Drama Brothers with the other forgotten males of the series, and never evolves past being a pretty face with a twisted heart, something that Alejandro eventually does. So we see Justin as a weaker villain than his fellows, but also a more wicked one, simply because he never got the chance to not be.
Being on that show is way too tough on the bod.
Even further along, we have Eva, the athlete who once eloquently said, "If they don't want to leave in body bags, they won't vote for me." That summarizes Eva's character pretty well. She's a brute with a temper and enough muscles to make that an issue.
Who needs this stupid TV show anyway?
To her credit, in later seasons, she does try to curb her anger issues, to limited success. While she can admit to her faults, she never quite gets the better of them, spelling doom for the groin of a poor Scotsman when she finds work as a field reporter. Eva's a danger to her fellow man, sure, but she's the most honest out of our bad guys. She settles problems by punching them, and in a way, you have to admire that. Just shy of our finalist, let's have a hand for Chef Hatchet, our drill sergeant nasty and culinary extraordinaire, who also serves as Chris's muscle and main means of torturing the cast. It wouldn't be fair to label Chef a villain in the traditional sense. He is, after all, simply a man trying to do his job, and his job involves punishing teenagers to the breaking point.
What did you say to me, soldier?
But let's not fool ourselves into thinking he doesn't enjoy his lot in life, because Chef obviously doesn't mind being the bad guy. Nonetheless, he does demonstrably have more integrity than Kris or Blainley. He certainly isn't starved for fame or ratings. In fact, he seems to be perfectly content in the role he's in despite its less than stellar requirements. He even has a limited amount of patience with his employer's antics, which almost borders on caring about the kids he's responsible for. Almost. But Chef has one saving grace that makes him a pretty interesting character, and that's his willingness to defy Kris for his own purposes. And one such purpose is his love of a challenge. We see this most consistently in the first season, where he engages with contestants who gain his respect as equals. One example is his ongoing feud with Izzy, who he physically fights as an equal, or Gwen, whom he offers to follow into combat if the need should ever arise. All this to say, Chef actually seems to care about the potential of the contestants, something Kris forever underestimates. For everything Chef is, it demonstrates a sort of utilitarian moral backbone that's an unexpected but not unwelcome touch to his character. But it does lead him to being beaten out by our final three. Let's take a look. The final member of the OG cast to join Total Drama was Blainley, who defied tradition by being an adult reality show host as well as a seasoned polemicist. Right from the start, she showed herself to be cut from the same cloth as Kris and a willing member of his unholy trinity of executive producers. The name of her game is gossip, and she does everything in her power to sow discord for the sake of a good story.
What would a fresh bunch of losers be without an injured one?
Blainley sort of came along to put the drama in Total Drama, a feat she accomplishes at the expense of her own image. How effective she is at being a villain is questionable, considering the low success rate of her plans and her general lack of skills. But her willingness to play the long game and gamble with the well-being of anyone to get what she wants establishes her as a definitive contender for most evil. She takes bronze not for any redeeming qualities, but rather that she simply gets outdone as a villainess. Our silver is equally our most evil contestant Total Drama has ever seen, Courtney. This shouldn't surprise anyone. Despite her popularity as Duncan's original flame, Courtney is all the evil of a career politician wrapped up in a teenage girl's body.
Can't let you hold me back. Sorry!
Not only is she incredibly manipulative and unfortunately intelligent, she's also incredibly petulant and a horribly sore loser. Her entitlement alone eventually debases her as arch-villain of the second half of Season 2. In her time, Courtney doesn't cause as many eliminations as Heather, who sets the record, but she did manage to have at least some friction with every other contestant. She became so hated that her only chance to stay in the game is winning immunity. As obnoxious as she is, though, her damning flaw is her ruthlessness. At least once, she's been willing to let others die for the sake of her ambitions, which equally indicates a level of selfishness unmatched by her peers. Total Drama is, at the end of the day, a game. Despite the trauma it causes them, most of the contestants seem to be capable of admitting that.
Courtney is this close to begging me to take her back.
But Courtney is a special case. Her drive and her conviction to be the best, coupled with the delusion that she is the best, make her, for lack of a better term, the worst. But even she pales in comparison to our gold medal evildoer, Chris McLean, the host with the most and a glaring satire of the soullessness of mass-produced, reality-based entertainment. Chris is perhaps the most evil animated character to come out of Canada in the past decade. And the thing is, he isn't even trying. At the end of the day, Chris is the master of ceremonies. He doesn't torture his charges for the sake of it, but rather because he wants to see them squirm.
Yeah, that's right. We're talking major stink bomb.
More than that, he wants the audience to see the pain he inflicts on his charges because he knows it'll make him richer and more noteworthy. But simply, every horrible thing he does for the sake of his own image. Just a cursory glance at his actions could give anyone pause. He lies, he cheats, and he destroys in the name of drama. He toys with the lives of children, all while dangling the obscene amounts of luxury in front of them to keep them playing. Looking at him from a non-comedic angle, he almost seems like a cautionary tale to anyone who might want to compete on Survivor. And that's not to mention the devastation he merits out on the environment and every challenge with his deadly machines.
I thought the bear was tranquilized and returned to his handler.
Even worse, his complete disregard for safety. He houses his staff and his competitors in dangerous and unsanitary environments, up to and including an island steeped in deadly amounts of radiation. Conclusively, Chris is a cruel god. He commands the world of Total Drama and uses his power to make his puppets dance for him. It might raise an interesting discussion about the corrosive influence of power and what crimes against humanity you can get away with if you're entertaining about it. But, we're out of time. Alright, so what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality of the characters in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.